Welcome to the first episode of my sort of vlog. Today I was thinking of talking about my developer career, like how did it all started and how I ended up here. Not physically here, but what I'm doing now. So, when I was a child, I was fascinated with how computers are used to sort of spin the world, like running manufacturing factories and whatever, all these sort of things, how elevators work, and also how things work in general, not only the software but also the electronics. That was interesting to me. So I didn't know about anything about corporations, how companies work or whatever, but I just knew that I wanted to be a programmer, whatever it means, writing programs, right? Like, what could it be? It's a programmer. Well, I didn't know how to get there, but at that point maybe I didn't think it so far yet. When I started programming, I just found out about Microsoft QuickBasic. No, actually QBasic, which is like a cheaper version of that. Well, I think trying to write some games with it or something with my friend and alone, and then I got fascinated about operating systems. How do they run everything? Because operating system, it seemed like the basis of everything. I didn't know about embedded electronics so much. To me, it was that operating system seems to be in charge of everything. So I quickly learned that operating systems mostly written in C, and also the actually game engines are written in C. So like at 5th grade, I think, I started to learn C. I got the book and I started to learn it like almost every day, writing stuff in C. And then later on, book about x86 assembly, because it seemed that you cannot build an operating system without it. Besides those books, of course, I loaned a lot of computer books from the library. Then the internet or the website stuff became popular, like late 90s, early 2000s. Everybody wanted to build a website. So I think we learned HTML at school, like at 6th grade maybe, and I think that doesn't happen anymore in schools, but like, at that time it was probably a thing that the teachers thought makes a lot of sense. Why shouldn't everybody know about HTML? And later, actually, maybe 8th grade, we also were learning programming in school. I don't know if it's common today, but I heard that it was common in schools in Finland in 90s and early 2000s. Of course, I wanted to get into web programming too. Oh, and one other thing, like also like some magazines for children had HTML tutorials at that time, early 2000s or so. So anyway, I think I found out that HTML isn't powerful enough to build services. So before PHP, I did a few things with Flash, but I didn't like it even then. It was fun for animations and stuff, but not for actual websites. At that point, PHP seemed like the answer. I realized that it wasn't great, especially at that time. PHP had a lot of silly flaws. Like I remember how the functions were named in a certain way in PHP because of the hashing or looking up for functions. Anyway, I started to do stuff with PHP, and Actually, when I was like 15, 16, I was already making a website for sports association, and the point was that I didn't want to just make a website with HTML the previous version was just plain HTML edited by hand. I wanted to make it with PHP with an admin panel that I implemented myself. The only thing I did not implement there was a HTML editor. The editor was some open source project I used for purpose. At that time, these people were still called webmasters. Nowadays everybody is a front-end developer. But I was a webmaster, as was the person who was there before me. And the website was pretty okay for the standards of that time. People were pretty happy with the design. The colors were a bit off, like every website at that time had. I would still do pretty much the same things, just more rounded corners maybe, whatever is preferred. Actually, I did rounded corners back then as well, but it wasn't the CSS feature. And then I started to be more interested in electronics. Like I said before, how things worked was interest for me, and maybe I just still didn't know how to get into be a real programmer. Like, I'm not saying that front-end development wasn't that, but I wasn't actually making money. It was basically pro bono at that time. I just was doing it because it was fun. I don't know. I was hitting a wall. I didn't know how to proceed with programming. Actually, just as website things were a bit boring for me. I didn't feel like I want to do website stuff for a living. Again, it's not I would feel like it's not the proper job or anything. It's just I was more interested how to make an operating system, how the stuff works. But I just felt like I'm more interested in how to get there when you can start utilizing the hardware and make software. So I ended up studying electronics for years, from 2004 until 2012, you could say. When I was studying electronics, I started to get interested in radio frequencies and microwaves. I was experimenting with all sorts of microwave stuff, and I became a radio amateur. And then at some point or quite early actually, during the studies, I ended up getting a job, and I was supposed to test components like IGBTs and I think capacitors or something for new products. And what happened there was that I just worked on that for a couple of weeks. Can't recall anymore, but it was a really short time. And no, I didn't get fired. But instead, I was put to work with automated testing, because at that point in this company, all the testing was like doing manual steps. There was like a booklet testing. I don't remember what it was called. Like a booklet that describes every test step, and you must reproduce those steps and check that everything works and nothing explodes. Explosions were pretty much a possibility in some test cases. So I ended up automating some of those things, and I worked on that stuff for a couple of years. Ended up designing test setups that were replicated in several different countries within the company and writing tons of code. Then at the end of that job, I started working actual embedded systems. I was writing a new, I would call it an operating system because it was more like a framework for future work. So I did that thing, and then due to some issues with how the contracts worked in that company, I left the job, and we ended up first of all starting our own startup about game development, and especially again I was more interested, as well as the others, in developing something that others can use to build on top of. So even though we wanted to develop games, we also wanted to build tech and sell some sort of consulting for that tech. Then, well, a couple of years passed, and we didn't really make much money, and I had to start an IT job. At that time, I also started to study computer science at the University of Helsinki. So I was finally on track. What happened next is that we sold the company, and I kept working on IT. I ended up again working a bit lower level. I ended up working with IP Stack and writing protocols while studying computer science. And I also ended up writing my own operating system. First the kernel, first the firmware stuff, then a real kernel, and finally an actual operating system for Raspberry Pi. It wasn't originally for Raspberry Pi, but for XM0. It is a smaller ARM processor, but Raspberry Pi was easily available, and I just ported my stuff on that platform. It's actually a decent operating system, considering that I built it myself in like 5 years or so. You can actually compile a lot of POSIX compliant source code. Of course, there is no networking, because it's not because I didn't try. Actually, I also was writing a IP stack from scratch, but that is not an easy task if you want to do a real working IP stack, not just like a proof of concept work. I did a couple of iterations of that, but I never got it really good. It can work with UDP. Some protocols anyway work on that, on top of that, and I never wrote the actual drivers for my own kernel. But yeah, it's a working operating system anyway. It has a real fat file system support and everything, and multitasking. Then after that, or after all this, I graduated, ended up to just work with a startup in San Francisco, which, despite I was working with web stuff before, I never really used JavaScript. So it was my first touch to JavaScript at that startup. We were using Node.js. Oh well, actually I did use Node.js just like a half a year before starting there, but so we were working with JavaScript, and it was like in my opinion, we were doing a better version of Heroku. Like, the idea was that you would deploy Node.js code to our cloud service, and we would handle all the domain names, DNS records, whatever proxy stuff, reliability with multiple data centers. The idea was pretty nice. Most of the customers were using it for server-side rendering. Actually, a lot of like how PHP stuff worked back in the days. Although with the major difference that at that point everybody was running the Node.js server all the time. Our innovation was that we would put the Node.js process to sleep when your website is not running or it's not used. And that was pretty clever because everybody will save money and actually it makes the reliability better. Unfortunately, especially at that time, many Node.js projects were not so well made, so there were all kinds of memory leaks and other issues. And even in Node.js itself, there were several bugs that seemed to cause crashes. Later on, the service was expanded to cover pretty much every programming language, including COBOL, by using Docker. I liked the service a lot. There were a lot of issues, but it was never because the stack couldn't work. It was just the service just scaled up so fast, and there was a lot of abuse, like people mining cryptocurrencies and whatever stuff, and even illegal stuff. So it was a lot of maintenance work as well that we had to do there. Okay, now you think that okay, if that was like PHP, but like continuously running processes, then well, you know that AWS Lambda has been there for I don't know, like 10 years or so, but nobody used it until some people figured out that hey, why don't you run Node.js? Now it got even closer to what PHP was, and well, I guess for some people it works pretty well. I'm not a fan of that stuff personally because it makes it a lot harder to use WebSockets and real-time stuff, which is now a thing, and I hope will be more increasing in popularity instead of like pulling stuff from the server or expecting the user to refresh or whatever is the other option. Of course, I don't know, like whatever people want to do. I just like the way that the server can push data to the client. I don't know, but that's just my opinion. Anyway, what happened then was that this startup migrated this way of doing things as well, and at that point I was actually working a lot of other things there, and eventually I quit for other reasons. It's not that I didn't like the new way of doing things. Using Lambda is just fine as well. Other companies like Cloudflare is using a system more like where they are running actual Node.js processes and then executing your code when you get a request. That way you don't need to spin everything up. Now I know what it is to be a programmer. Now I would call it a developer, although at the border in the US, usually if I say that I'm a developer, they think I'm a real estate developer. In a way, IT feels such a depressing field. I can compress my whole working history into a few minutes, and then at the end I can tell you that none of those things are used anymore because those are either irrelevant or outdated or both. Although I don't know what could be a field where you could do something. Well, construction work is one where you might leave some sort of lasting touch. It is 18 degrees Celsius here right now. This road is completely renewed. I think last week it wasn't like this, so during this week, or like they say here in Italy, restyling. It's not an English word, but an Italian word. Don't be fooled by that. It sounds like English. It's not. It's Italian. Now, when I was a child, the only developers I knew were people like Bill Gates and Linus Torvalds. And obviously, if those were the only people I was aware of, I thought that, well, being a software developer is like being a rock star, apparently, because that's how it seemed like in the late 90s and early 2000s. So then I was imagining it would be like that, and I don't know if I was disappointed when I realized it worked like that. It wasn't like that. There were thousands of other people, software developers like me, who were okay, but not like rock stars, or even very good, but still only a very few people even knew their name, and they weren't popular. Then at some point, of course, there started to be these developer advocates that are something not exactly a customer support personnel, and they seem to be no more like rock stars, or it seems to be like, if you think about it. Although it is not usually because they have written Linux or founded Microsoft and written Microsoft Windows or something. It's just that they are everywhere. They are talking in every conference and event and whatever. So it's a bit different. Then at some point I felt that maybe I'm getting some recognition as a developer, even though I don't still think I have made anything particularly good software or popular software. Whatever is the reason, that started to happen a few years ago maybe. At the same time I started to feel like that's not actually the publicity I want. It's not like I want to be a rock star. It was a cool thing as a child. That's not actually what I want to be. I want to do things well and do things that I find interesting. I wouldn't like to be a rock star anymore, or I never was, but I wouldn't like that. So when I was a child, of course, I read the biographies of Bill Gates and Linus Torvalds. I read both, or I read the Information Highway. That was the biography of Bill Gates, and then the Story of Linux and Just for Fun, that were biographies of Linus Torvalds. And I think those were inspiring me to be a programmer or software developer. Maybe it's not the best inspiration, but like thinking whether you should be some sort of rock star. Although if I wouldn't have read those, I would never been so interested in programming and mathematics. Now, after seeing just a glimpse of what it would be sort of a rock star in this field, I just rather be nobody, but just do things that I'm interested in. And me being more famous, that is not my goal. Today, it feels strange that Linus Torvalds was once like a rock star, like in this one conference where he started his talk. If I remember correctly, he said, because people were cheering for him, he started with saying, "I'm your God." It feels so absurd today today it feels strange for me because there aren't such rock stars anymore. There are more famous developers now than there were back then, so perhaps it's not longer as a rarity, and the people aren't treated as such a rock star anymore, or maybe they are. I'm just not that young anymore to understand how it worked 20 years ago. If I sound a bit incoherent, it's because this climb is between 6 and 9% uphill. About 20 kilometers to go. The altitude is 529 meters. And I'm going higher because the shorter route was in really bad condition. So I'm going higher and hoping that there's a better road there. Back down. What a stupid thing to do. I guess the battery dies here. This will be the end of this vlog. I hope you enjoyed. Max.
Everything I saw before me.